What's up, everybody? Welcome to Hollywood Unveiled, where we pull back the curtain on the Hollywood entertainment industry and get to know the people behind the magic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And Logan, today's guest has over 120 credits on IMDb, including Shrek, Zathura, Avatar, The Conjuring, Silicon Valley, Insecure, The Flash, The Batman, Bridgerton, and Outlander, just to name a few. Logan, our guest is VFX Supervisor and Producer, Tammy Sutton.
Yes. Now, Tammy was a really fun... I will admit there were a fean times where I felt a little on the outside because y'all were able to really, like the VFX side of it, like both of y'all were like, oh, and this, and then this, and then, oh, we can do that, and I, was a little on the outside, but it's at a certain point, that switch kind of flipped over, and I was like, oh, okay, now I'm following. I'm kind of learning the lingo. I'm learning the shorthand a little bit.
Well, you held your own really well, and I think that there's a lot of commonalities between practical and digital that we can still relate to. I mean, like, we talk a lot about proper planning, pre-production, being able to break down the script ahead of time so you know what you're dealing with. I think that all departments can benefit from a lot of the advice she gives in this interview.
The importance of being included in the process as early as possible. For every department, how that is a benefit. You get people included early, they can do more good stuff for you.
Absolutely. And well, let's just get right into it and hear more from our guest, Tammy Sutton.
Yeah.
Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
We've known each other for years now, but I really don't know what pulled you into filmmaking and eventually VFX.
I started graphic design. That's what I went to school for originally. So I was doing graphic design for a few years, and then I met my now husband. And as we were dating, he was working in visual effects, which at the time was kind of a secret. He didn't really know what it was. It wasn't all over the internet. It was very secret. Still, almost everything's still shot on film. And so I was like, well, that looks fun. And I was kind of like, with my graphic design, like, okay, now what? What's my next move? I was doing websites and logo design and stuff, and I was ready to move on. And so he was able to convince the owner of a company to hire me on as a low-paid intern. I would do their website and they would teach me VFX and see if I had a knack for it. And it was a very, in this office, I was the first female to ever work as an artist. And after a week of being there, they ended up hiring me full time. And it took years before I ever did graphic design for them, which was kind of cool. But I ended up starting doing wire removals and just kind of took to it pretty well. And it was fun. I had no problem sitting there for hours and hours doing wire removals and roto and everything. And just worked my way up through that, doing, eventually into comping and some comp souping, then 2D souping, then onset souping, and now I'm in production. And I still do some onset souping.
I understand some of those words. Yeah.
Yeah.
What movies or shows kind of got you interested in the filmmaking process? And were there any in particular that kind of piqued your interest towards VFX?
I didn't know much about VFX before I met people that were doing it, but I grew up in Los Angeles in a little suburb where they filmed a lot. So growing up, there were always production trucks blocking our way. I lived in a trailer park and they would often shoot at the park that I grew up in. So we would get paid, like $100 a day just to not park out front so that they could have the space. So I got to observe. And because I was just a quiet kid, they let me just stand around and watch for hours and hours. And as long as I didn't cause a disruption, and it wasn't, it was before cell phones, no one's, recording or letting any secrets out. They just let me watch, and it was kind of cool. And because of that, I always knew that, filmmaking had all these magic tricks in the background, but it was a lot of fake too, which also led me into liking horror movies because I knew it was all magic behind the scenes and it wasn't real. So it was more fun than scary to me, which also led me to horror, which is another big influence. But I didn't really know what visual effects were until I started discovering it in real life of like, oh, this is how this is done, which then led an appreciation to my, movies that were already my favorite, getting into them deeper, going like, how is all this stuff done?
When it came to learning those visual effects, like, was it all just kind of learned, by doing? Did you do any classes, schooling? Yes.
No classes or anything. It was software that was not easy to obtain at home. So it was all stuff that you had to learn. Like the first software I used was Liberty, which was just a frame-by-frame painting software before Photoshop could handle giant Cineon DPX files. It was just frame by frame. And what this had going for it was a slight onion skinning where you could kind of see the frame before. So you could reference it and be able to paint to a previous frame.
a lot of VFX artists, at least I've met, and myself included, the very first effects we've ever done is what? A lightsaber, right? And so you're onion skinning, you're painting by each frame by hand. You're doing the one little lightsaber, but
yeah. Well, I didn't get that lucky. I didn't get to play around with that because again, everything was on film. So you only had access to files that were in the office. Mm-hmm. And in the office, you were busy working. There was no time to experiment and learn. But I learned from people and from just doing it. They would give me a problem. I would work on it. And then I would walk over to another desk and ask for help. There was no schooling at the time that I was even aware of. No online tutorials that I had access to anyways.
So I got to ask, because like, maybe I'm hungry, so I'm noticing it, but you talk about onion skinning and souping. I'm hearing a lot of food terms. So
I never would have thought of souping as a food term.
That's a good one.
So for someone who's kind of a layperson with it, like totally. what is onion skinning and what is souping?
That's really funny. Onion skinning, it just lets you see transparently a little ghost of a previous image or previous frame or the next frame.
Okay.
So if I'm painting out a wire down the middle and I can see what's over here as the camera moves, I can kind of steal that little corner and bring it over here to the next frame and paint it in. So it's more of an animation term, but yeah, you can kind of see a hint of it. And souping is just a short, an abbreviation for VFX supervising.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
I was ready to go for some onion skin soup. So,
like I said,
that's funny.
French
I never would have made that connection, but yeah, we're so used to, using quick terms to move fast. And for VFX souping, I either go on set, make sure everything, collaborate with the filmmakers, make sure we shoot everything to get the best quality and get their creative vision. And then we'll also supervise back in the office where, we get the footage, we go back, and then I know what they intended on set versus, things change during the edit and make sure everything still looks good and remains with the original plan as best as possible. And
well, I know that you started your career in paint and roto, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm always hats off to anybody in paint and roto because good God, I don't want to be doing that.
Yes, there is a skill set for it and much respect for it.
Absolutely. I've worked with roto artists where it's just magic. They're rotoing strands of hair off of someone's head. And I still don't know how they do it, which it hurts my head just to think about it. But going from that, how did you transition to on-set supervision and eventually producing, or was it producing first, supervising first?
It was supervising first. After a while, I'm just like, okay, what can I do next? Mm-hmm. What can I learn next? And so I just started bugging my, the owner of the company I was at, like, hey, I want to be on set. The first company I worked at, I asked a lot, like, hey, you guys are going to set. Can I shadow? Can I learn? And they let me eventually. And it was really cool because I grew up near Vasquez Rocks in LA, a big filming location. And the first show I got to shadow on was shooting there. So it was cool to have grown up with this famous landmark nearby and then actually being there for work was really cool. So I just started shadowing and just observing. And, if you're quiet, just like when I was a kid, if you're quiet, observing, they'll let you stay and it's fine as long as you're not in the way. So I just got to quietly observe for a while. And then after the next company, I was like, okay, how can I get on set? And there was finally a project that I was collaborating with that made sense for me to be there. It was a commercial promo for Showtime Boxing. So it was this very fancy camera move with some boxers. And it was kind of like the promo show, for commercials. And it was really cool to be there and to collaborate and to bring up things that somebody might not have thought of from the VFX perspective. Because, the director's like, okay, I want this, and that, but we're replacing the entire background and there's a huge camera move and there's a boxing ring that has to stay intact. And so it was fun to collaborate and plan that. And then I got the bug and just kept bugging everybody to let me do it. And then eventually it became part of my job, which is awesome.
So looking at your filmography, you've hit something, and you've hit a lot of superhero stuff, or a lot, but at least some stuff. And there was something I was curious about. I'm curious about the divide between using green screen on set with like the supervision and kind of how that ties to it. So using green screen on a set versus using something like the volume for something like the Batman. What was how do those kind of differ, or are they like oddly similar when working on set with them?
It's definitely a lot different. I have worked with the volume and I've worked with a lot of green screen. The volume wasn't always accessible to everybody. So, that even when it became popular and known, it wasn't a first choice for everybody just because availability. It's got some upsides and some downsides. I've had to fix a lot of, volume work in post. sometimes the blacks are just a little too lifted. And as you're doing a huge horizon and the blacks need to recede into the distance and it kind of just all looks milky, we've had to contrast it up. We've had to replace stuff on the volume. And if you don't have a green screen to key, it's all roto and you have built-in lighting. And so, you can fight against it. But when it's done right and planned for, it's amazing. But that's the other trade-off is you have to plan all of your assets ahead of time. You need to know what your background's going to be. And I find a lot of times with filmmakers, depending on the budget level, they don't have enough time in pre-production to spend months coming up with the assets and getting approvals early on. A lot of times approvals happen at the very, very end. We're doing VFX to the last minute and they can still make creative changes. So, in one way, it's great. It locks everybody in at the head of the project, but not everybody's always ready to make those decisions. So on a superhero movie, the backgrounds can vary, especially when you're creating new worlds. Mm-hmm. And they say, okay, this is going to be a blue planet, big rocks. And then later down the road, that's what you have. You can't change that later. And in editing, stories change a lot. Things evolve. And if you say, hey, it would really make sense if this had a different landscape now, but you're pretty locked to it, or you spend a lot of money fixing it. So there's pros and cons to both. I get a lot of indie filmmakers coming up and saying, okay, we're going to save a bunch of money by shooting on the volume. I'm like, that's great, but you want to shoot in 2 months and you don't have anything booked and you need to be making assets and decisions ahead of time. So I think it really depends on the production and how much time they're going to give you to set everything up.
I think I run into a similar situation where somebody says, hey, I want to save a bunch of money and put it on a green screen. I'm like, whoa. That's not how that works. Every time you cut to a shot with a green screen, that costs money every single time. And you touched on something that I think is actually really important that people need to know. One thing that I find extremely common is a lack of pre-production in the visual department. I very rarely see storyboards or even animatics at the level of the budget that I typically work in. So a lot of the times when they come to me and say, hey, can we do this effect? I'm like, well, I need to know what it looks like. How do you manage a production like that? And maybe do you end up having to do a lot of the pre-production or the previs on your end?
Usually if it comes to it, we'll put a team together and say, this needs to have previs. But I've requested storyboards many times and kind of insisted. And what you do is when you give them the budget, because now I do the producing side as well, so we'll say, okay, here's your budget. It ranges from here to here. And the reason there's a huge range is because there's so many unknowns. So we're planning for the craziest. We call it the nuclear option. We've got, here's the reasonable option and here's the nuclear option. If you want to start narrowing down your budget and really understanding where you're going to land and have less of a window, we need to start coming up with some actual solid, information. And that's when we'll start getting into, storyboarding. I haven't worked a lot with previs. It happens, but it's usually like, stick figure mock-ups with a camera move to understand something complicated that a client wants to do. But I haven't gotten into the deep, huge superhero movies where the whole movie is previs ahead of time. That would be awesome, but I haven't gone that way yet.
I'll say.
Yeah, that would be cool.
And getting into these productions that you've been on, I mean, like, you've been on some amazing scaled productions. What are some preconceived notions that you might have had that were either confirmed or dispelled about VFX or even movie making process once you were, say, on set or even, in studio working with a team in VFX?
Yeah. When I was an artist, and I'm sure you can relate to this, you'll be working on a shot and you're like, why didn't they just move this sandbag that I now have to paint out for an entire scene? Why didn't somebody just walk over and move it? But now I've been on set and it's complete chaos at times. And sometimes pausing for 20 seconds to move something out of the way can cause such a trickle down effect of just stress and people getting, going crazy. And VFX can sometimes be felt as the bad guy on set because we're taking extra time. We're slowing you down. We're going as fast as we can. We're getting our photos, our references, whatever we need. But because it's a department that people aren't always familiar with, it's a burden at times. So I've seen and I've been there and I've been, in the situation now where I'm like, just leave the sandbag there. We'll paint it out later. It will save everybody time right now and just lower the stress level. It's going to cost a little bit later, but in the big scale of things, let's make our day and keep the stress level down. and we'll deal with this sandbag for 20 shots later. So I used to be like, why didn't they just do it? But I also used to say that at least it's job security. I now have 20 shots to work on, and that's great. It's keeping me busy. So at the same time, it's like, I guess it's good someone left it there. But I was, wrote a paint wanting to learn more comp, and I'm like, I want to be working on other stuff.
With all that said, I mean, what do you see as something that maybe misunderstood by other people or other departments about what you do in VFX?
A lot of times I have to go up and get a lighting reference, and it feels silly, especially when I have to use the chrome ball, which I absolutely hate doing. It's like embarrassing to walk up with the chrome ball and say, hey, I need this, because everybody thinks you're just doing it to justify your job. But then I go back to my CG team, and they really want those references so they can get more accurate lighting. And I can convince the producers, the director, the DP, they all understand because we've had pre-production meetings, we've had discussions at length. But the people who are trying to move fast and set up for the next scene, this is the trick, is I always get to go get my references at the end of a scene. At the end of a scene, everybody's ready to move on. Well, grips are ready to start moving things out of the way and come in, and they have to wait. And it's the most pressure with all the eyes are on you of like, you're just waiting. And so often lights get turned off before I even get my reference. And so I try to get it at the beginning of a scene, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go get my reference. And then as soon as they start rolling, they're like, oh, stop, got to make an adjustment. And now my lighting reference is off because they've adjusted the lighting based on where the actor's landing versus where they did it in rehearsal. And that's just like a tiny little bit. A lot of times they think I'm just taking up time and not realizing in the big picture, it's going to look better because of it. And they don't care about saving money. Like, hey, this is going to save a ton of money in post, but the production budget and the post budget is so completely separated at the time of filming that they don't make the connection. And especially the crew that's working hard and just wants to move on to the next thing.
And it's a little like the sound guy asking for room tones in some respects.
Right.
Everybody quiet.
Yeah. So everybody thinks whispering in the back corner is going to be fine. They're like, you don't get what room tone is. And doing, a little, working on short films and doing sound, I absolutely realize the value of it now. Yeah. You don't have it. And it's very bizarre with this void of sound. Yeah. But I also think with the misunderstanding of what a visual effects supervisor does, it has changed a lot. There's so much online and YouTube and so many shows that you can go and learn about it. So I think the knowledge has grown, but they might not always necessarily understand what the on-set person's doing, but they understand a lot more of the big picture of what happens later. So I'm having less backlash when I ask for things a lot of times, especially if the DP and the director know what I need and why. They understand it's to, help their final product. So they're usually on my side, and then I'm fine. But sometimes you get hired on a show that you didn't talk to, and you're there the first day and you've met nobody. And that's when it's a struggle. You have to figure out who are all the key players that you need to get what you need.
Well, you actually just reminded me, when I'm on set, everybody's sort of got their groups, if that makes sense. Everybody, maybe you can relate to this. I always kind of feel like the odd man out, because if I'm there as a VFX supervisor, it's pretty much just me. And
always. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm the kid at school that sits by himself at the lunch table when everybody's on lunch. So, I mean, I totally relate to that. First day, I don't know anybody. So I have to interject and make I am an authority on the thing I'm doing and have to carry myself as such. And everybody's like, hey, who's this guy doing? Okay, we got to stop for him to take pictures and the reference and all that. All right, fine. Yes.
I see you rolling your eyes when you're saying it, because that's how it feels. Everybody's like, oh, you just got to get her thing again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like, you don't really need that, do you?
Yeah, I know. It's funny on set, because that is very true. It's like, yes, that's like the lunchroom picks who you're going to sit with and who you're going to talk to. And sometimes it's really hard when you haven't met anybody ahead of time, and you're like, hey, who are you? Because they're not wearing name tags with their positions. Yeah. You have to just observe and be like, you're doing that. Okay, I'm going to start with you. And it can get pretty tricky.
And Logan, you got it pretty great, because the makeup teams always seem like they're having a party in those trailers and everything. So,
trailer.
Usually by the time they get out of the trailer, that's where everyone's passing out, because they've been there since 3 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For my role, I always end up, sometimes I've had assistants on occasion, but very rarely. So a lot of times, like what happened with COVID is we did a lot of rolling lunches. Mm-hmm. So you've got a department of 5 people, you take turns. 2 of you go off, the rest cover for you, and I have no one to cover for me. So one production started bringing me a bagged lunch. I would order at the beginning of the day, and there was a few other people that did that. they'd bring me a bagged lunch, but I couldn't walk off to eat. And it was, we're masked up. We can't eat on set. Yeah. And so it's like, I can't. So my food would sit there all day and I just wouldn't get to eat. And then I even got scolded once. I went to a parking lot and I sat down and I started eating a sandwich. There's no one around. And I got yelled at because it was a masked zone, even though it was a parking lot and there was no one around. And I'm like, oh, but there's nowhere for me to go. And they're like, you have to go all the way to these tents. And I'm like, I can't. Guess I don't get to eat today. And then one time they forgot to bring me silverware. So that's part of my set kit now. My backpack always has an extra set of plastic silverware. And it comes in handy when I travel for non-work, for work. It's something you wouldn't have thought of, but I always have a set of silverware.
Yeah. So talk us through your process. Like you're working as a VFX producer. You've just been given a script. Where do you start? Like, how do you break it down and how do you start kind of like planning and budgeting what you need?
Yeah. A lot of times you get sucked into a script. And so I stop thinking of the VFX. So I just like to read it, see what happens, understand it, and then go back in and give it a VFX pass. So that I'm not, the story can distract me sometimes, which is great. You got a good script. I'm getting stressed. So I go back and I just start highlighting. I start highlighting everything digitally and just saying, okay, this could be a VFX. Because, at that stage, unless they've talked about a couple scenes, I have no idea where they're shooting, what their plan is. It could say somebody is driving up a street in San Francisco. I don't know if they're going to shoot in San Francisco. I don't know if they're going to shoot on a back lot and try to change everything in the background. And I have clues that I can start, figuring out like, okay, this is only happening, this scene is only here once. Maybe it's going to be more of a VFX so they can actually find a location. So I have to start asking all of those questions in addition to the obvious stuff. Like, okay, there's a big explosion. There's, here's the obvious things that they're going to need, but how are they shooting it? Are they going to have a stunt person on a wire with or without, the, background events happening? Are they going to have just debris shooting up and we're going to add things later? And there's so many little things, even from something that's obviously a VFX, that you have to go. So I just do a huge breakdown and, make a spreadsheet and send it to the clients and say, okay, let's start narrowing this down. And usually because I'm dealing with the producers, budget is a big issue and they want to know where they're landing. And I can't get there until I have more info. So if I give them the giant list of everything that could be VFX, they'll start making overriding decisions of, we'll find a location for that. Don't worry about that driving work. Or, hey, we know for sure that this actor isn't going to be comfortable doing this scene while actually driving or on a, so then they start deciding green screen versus a flatbed trailer and all of these things. And it all depends on what needs to be seen background wise.
On that note, I mean, how involved are you when you're building up how an effect is executed? Like when you're designing something, are you putting together any second unit or VFX unit crews for this? Are you arranging the studios that you're going to film in, or is it mostly a case of they tell you the day you're shooting and maybe you have some say in the scheduling of it based on certain technical aspects, but they tell you when, where, and they have the crew and maybe the green screen is already in the grip truck or something. I don't.
Right. It's all across the board, but I never have anything to do with scheduling. I am always told when and where. No, it really varies on the project and what it is. There are times where they'll just send me off with second unit and I'll have an idea of what week that's going to be. And they'll tell me which days are needed. So I'll at least have it narrowed down to the week. So yeah, I've gone off and done second unit stuff, even with actors, which is nerve wracking when I don't have a director with me. But then there's times where they'll say, okay, we really want you to handle this outside of production. It just makes more sense to have a smaller team and it's just VFX and, not just for like element shoots, but, sometimes there's backgrounds that need to be shot, or we'll rent a stage, just a small stage, and figure that out ourselves. The trick is then we have to get into insurance and a whole different level of safety measures that a production already has in place. But I have had to deal with that as well. And it just depends on the project and how much time is left when the idea comes up. If the idea comes up during shooting, they're like, all right, we'll come back, we'll do some pickups and get it later. Sometimes the pickups are done just by the VFX team, and sometimes production will be involved. Sometimes production will get the permits for us, and then we're on our own from there. It runs the gamut of whatever could come up. We kind of have to be ready for everything. Yeah. And it also depends if I'm a producer on a project or an on-set soup or both, which is really hard to be both, but it has happened.
Well, as a producer, in many respects, the VFX business model seems to be there's sort of a bit of a race to the bottom, I'm noticing, when it comes to bidding and studios. At least in our circles, I know I've watched Life After Pi, and that was pretty groundbreaking as far as the information they were getting out about how this industry, it needs a little work as far as working conditions for artists and budgets and scheduling and things like that. Can you elaborate on the current state of the industry, and has anything changed since then, do you think? And what do you see as possible ways to create more equitable environment for artists and studios?
I know everybody's trying to unionize. I don't really know how effective that will be. It sounds great, but they've been trying for a very long time to make it fair. What I've seen, because I'm usually at a facility. So I'm not show side. I'm at a facility. They lend me out for the shows. So I see different projects coming in, and it all depends on the project and the time frame and what we agree to do. Sometimes we have to agree to take a show that has a 3-month turnaround, and we don't have enough of a team for it, but we need to do it anyways because it's better than not working at all. So and that's what a lot of the pressures come from, is filling your slot, and sometimes you have to underbid to do it. And it's like, I can keep my team busy and just, not make a profit, but, just break even and keep everybody employed, which is great. But then that budget that gets drawn up of like, okay, here's us going as thin as we can on this budget. That budget will then get taken to another VFX facility saying, well, this company is saying it's only cost this much. So what can you do? And we've lost work to other companies that say, you know what, they're just doing it at cost to keep their team busy. And, we know them better than we know you. So we're just going to pick them. There's so many variables that come up with that. And, usually the facility wants to make the work-life balance as best they can, try not to go crazy with overtime, but then you end up with a project that just kills you and you have no choice. I was on a project recently where my project was doing fine and another project was not, and they had 2 weeks to deliver, and all hands on deck. Everybody got pulled from every other show onto that show, which makes the current roster fall behind as well. But you had to get the one done and then figure out how to solve all the others along the way. And everybody was, just beat up after that. I don't see that as much in the industry, but I know it does happen. I think I've been lucky working at places that haven't done that to us much. But it used to be when I first started, you knew, even if things weren't very busy, you were doing a 10-hour day. The first company I worked at, they kind of insisted you were there for 10 hours, even if there was nothing to do. And you just knew for the month leading up to the deadline, you're going to be at work all the time. I had another company that also was like that, where you knew when you were in crunch time, you're just always going to be working. Don't make plans. And they had a taxi service ready before, like Lyft and Uber. They would just be like, if you were too tired to drive, get a cab. We'll reimburse you. We'll figure out how to get you back the next day. Because we were tired. And, I was working on 3D conversion shows, and that just drains your eyesight. I was supervising, stereo shows, and your depth perception just gets wonky after 10 hours of staring at it all day. And I'm seeing it, not correct yet. So, I'm making adjustments. So by the time I would drive home tired, my depth perception at night was just a mess. So, but you had to get through it. But I've seen it get a lot better, but then I still hear horror stories of other people having it really bad. I just haven't been in that boat lately, thankfully.
Hearing about getting you taxis and Ubers, that's already far more than I expected from some studios. So, that's,
yeah. Well, and it used to always be the rule, if you're working more than 10 hours, they'll feed you. And it got to the point where you just scheduled ahead of time. All right. And this was on features, so we had longer time to our deadlines, but you knew the month of the deadline, even if it's just a screening deadline, they were hiring caterers just to bring dinner every day. So it wasn't the same pizza and 3, takeout places nearby.
Nice.
But the fact that they had to schedule in caterers just to bring us dinner because we were going to be there at work always is crazy to me. That was just part of the deal. Yeah. I've seen it get a lot better. I have. Yeah. But now I don't know, because it's, the feast or famine. When things are good, it's fine. But yeah. And it got to the point where as producer, we had to put, food contingencies into our budgets.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And we started doing overtime contingencies. Like, okay, and that's for episodic. Episodic, we used to have hard deadlines. There's air dates. So we knew anything could happen, the week leading up to an air date. So we would just put overtime contingencies, like if you use it because you're making last minute changes, which happens a lot, it's in there. And if you don't use it, please don't use it. But if you don't use it, you get that money back.
No.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that one of your influences was The Matrix, which had massive innovations with VFX. Were there any technical achievements or particular effects that you've had a direct hand in creating that you're really proud of? And is there something that you're still hoping to tackle someday?
Interesting. What got me for Matrix was the bullet time effect. Before we all knew how it was done, and even after we learned how it was done, it still blows my mind of who thought of that. And then, as I got into visual effects and started learning that, the history of visual effects and practical effects and all the crazy things they did practically, still my brain watches the breakdowns going like, this is insane that someone thought of this and could pull it off. There's been things that I've done, but I do a lot of more hidden effects. Mm-hmm. So you'll see a crazy camera move and not think much of it and not realize how much VFX were actually involved in making it happen. And that's kind of fun. I can't think of an exact example at the moment. There was one show, Get Shorty, that I didn't hear much about when it came out, but the opener shot has just a long camera move, but it started on top of a crane and came down and they walked off and they walked through a casino to the front. And it's really cool. And most of it was practical, but it came with a lot of planning and a lot of VFX planning too. So just a lot of discussions back and forth of what about this? What about that? And then when they run into kind of a, hey, I'm not sure how to fix this part, I would be there in the meeting and say, well, why don't we do this slight little tweak and we'll help you just a little bit and smooth the bumps out. If you're taking a step down off of this crane, we'll hide it. You won't know what happened. And, so then you do this amazing practical shot. And then at the end, there's a sign that you're supposed to read that's just too far away, so let's make a CG version and make it bigger or something along those lines. Like, not exactly how the shot went, but yeah. There was one scene that I worked on Nashville. I don't remember what season, but I was on set in Nashville for Nashville, which was already kind of fun. And it was a show within a show or a commercial within a show. And so, they have this character and she's being filmed for a commercial and she's supposed to be on a cliff and it's raining on her and she's miserable. And this actress, she really looked miserable. I don't know if she really was, but I was convinced. But what they did is they wanted to be able to show the monitors in playback, like a behind the scenes view. Yeah. So the show was showing the thing being filmed. A little confusing. But so they wanted the monitors to show live feedback with the composite, with all the cliffs happening. But then when you see the wide shot, you see all the green screens and everything happening. Yeah. It was a pretty complicated camera move. So what was really fun about that is that they wanted the tracking markers to look right. Mm-hmm. So I had to put up prettier tracking markers than I normally do because it was also part of set dressing, which was kind of cool. Wasn't the most complicated thing, but it kind of was at the same time. And then we recomposited all the monitors to make it look like it was a live composite happening with the rain and the wind and all that stuff. It was really fun.
I've seen a lot of these movies where it's a movie about a movie being made. Yeah. Like the Bubble more recently kind of came out. They were making a movie about making a movie. And you see them doing the visual effects and just too much insider baseball, I guess. Cause I'm like, that's not what that looks like. That's not what a track. Yes, ping pong balls, but not like that, Or
and with makeup, anytime they just peel a prosthetic off their face, I'm like, no, that is not, no.
Yeah.
Unless you want to peel some of your face off too at the same time, Then.
When they bring us into pre-production, it makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. You get a different perspective, and not just for hey, I have a green screen and I want it to look good. Okay, let us be there and set it up. And I'm very particular about how I want my green screen set up and how I want them lit and all that stuff. And especially driving shots, very particular about driving green screens because they're hard to make look good. But I was on a show that was based off of it was a movie. It was based off of a book. And in the book, some supernatural things happen that no matter how good they look in real life, your brain is going to know it's fake. And they're always going to they're going to blame the VFX. Oh, the VFX look terrible. This thing can't really happen. I'm like, no matter what, if this happened in real life, it just wouldn't look real. Even if it's a practical creature, it's going to trigger that uncanny valley and it's going to throw you off. And this was people kind of like hovering over the ground. Unless there's a supernatural element, like forcing it to happen. And, there's a magic element of like, okay, I'm making you levitate. Having people just hovering and levitating is never going to look real. Plus it's with extras and you have to deal with just balance, gravity, and like, how do your feet land? Are they dangling or are you on
like an invisible platform kind of thing?
Yeah. So in pre-production, we talked a lot about it and we decided to eliminate that level of the supernatural part. It didn't serve the story enough. It was okay to take it out. But then as we're shooting it, one of the executive producers, who's kind of a big name on the project, comes over to me and he's like, we're going to make some of these people like hover and everything, right? And I'm just like, oh, we can talk about it. So that was where I was kind of stuck in the middle between producer and VFX supervisor, because I'm creative, but I also know the production side has already decided to nix it.
Yeah.
But I can't say that to this actor, executive producer in the moment who's literally about to go act in a scene. And it's very, So sometimes I've had to, if I'm playing both roles, I've had to have kind of a backup back in the office who can play the producer side for me. And I'll message them and say, hey, just so you know, this is happening. This is the stance we have to take because of budget, but I can't really say that directly to a director. The director has nothing to do with budget and would be offended if I started talking budget most of the time. So sometimes I have to have someone back in the office kind of be my producer, heavyweight.
Something that I run into myself where maybe I overthink something or I think it too technically in certain respects. And I try to make something look real. And I've gotten it looking how it would look in real life. And I'm psyched with it, but it doesn't look cinematic now. Yes. How do you balance that one where maybe it should look fancy or bigger, but in real life, it doesn't look like that in real life at all?
It hurts, but you have to let it go.
Yep.
The creative vision needs to be better. This happens. That's a really common thing. And that's a great point to bring up that I never hear anybody talk about. We'll take reference. A lot of times, especially as we're training artists to have the vision for realistic, because I do a lot of more of the realistic stuff, less of the CG. And I'll find a reference and I'll say, look at this photo in this background. It's real. But I mean, you can go outside and you can see the clouds and the clouds look fake all the time. And we always joke about, clouds with dark outlines. I'm like, I would have rejected that if that was a shot that came my way. Yeah. So you can start with realistic and, make sure all your levels are balanced and your grain and everything is looking right. But ultimately, if it's not pretty enough, it's not cinematic enough. That's a great point. You just have to let the reality go, but without it looking broken. That's the trick, which we face all the time. That's such a good point.
And do you find yourself working with a director or a producer or anybody who they tell you this is what they want and you've nailed it to a T, you've given them exactly what they want, only for them to realize what I wanted isn't translating the way I wanted? And how do you handle that with the director? I mean, even politically to a certain extent.
That is a really hard thing to work on. A director has a vision, but they don't know what the technical thing is. So they might be asking for something and that's not quite how to achieve it. So my job as VFX supervisor, once we're in post, is, talk to the director, get their vision, but don't take their words exactly and give it to an artist, because an artist isn't going to interpret it in the same way. Mm-hmm. And I find that happens a lot with, a director is way more creative the way they speak, that they're going to be like, okay, we want it to be magical, and magical can mean many different things to different people. I can't take director's notes and copy and paste it to an artist. I need to translate it as a supervisor. And I also need to be aware of, hey, that's a change of scope and it's a different direction. Now, do I need to have a conversation with the producer and say, hey, we can do this, but it's going to cost more because of, the new direction, or, hey, it was already approved up to a point. Now we're pivoting. That's a change of direction. And I have to figure out politically when's the best time to bring it up, that there could be a cost change, or that what they're asking for isn't going to be achieved in the way they think it can be. Because a lot of times it's I know it when I'll see it, and there could be 20 versions, there could be 50 versions before they'll either change their mind, because the more you see things, the more your vision evolves as well. You might see something and go, I know I don't like it, but I can't tell you why. And so you come up with a few other options to show them. And you just hope that you're narrowing down with each iteration what they want, even if you're getting it wrong a little bit and you have to come back and course correct a little bit. And sometimes it just gets beyond repair and you have to have those hard conversations. But you try to keep everybody up to date along the way so that they're not surprised by the end. And I find that's the best way. show that you're collaborating. You're not fighting against them. You're trying to get them there, but don't wait till, the 11th hour to tell them, hey, it's not going to look like you want it to. Make them part of the process so they at least understand it. And a lot of times their vision might change, especially not just from the VFX, from all the stuff we don't see. A lot of times an edit will have a temp VFX. They slap something together really rough in the edit, and the client gets so used to looking at it that even though it's not right, they like it and they get attached to it. I had a show kind of recently, a couple shows ago. They got so used to the timing that they put together and the positioning. It was a little bit of a monster, little jump scare. And we're looking through a window, a very complicated camera move, pushing in, but we're looking outside through a window. And what's back there is like a backyard. And it was way higher than it would be in real life. There's no hill to justify why your backyard is up this high, but they got so used to looking at it that we did it our way. We said, here is realistically where it would be. And here's a version where we've cheated it a little bit to give you closer to what you want. And at first they said, okay, yeah, that works. And then they ultimately came back and wanted it exactly like in their temp, which is so broken. And it was, hard for us to come to terms with it. But the client is right. As long as our composite isn't broken, we do everything else is as accurate as we can get it. But then we had to cheat the position of it, which maybe we're the only ones who will notice. I don't know. But they got so used to seeing it wrong that that's what they liked. And that'll happen with sound. They'll see something with temp sound, and then they get the real sound mix and they're like, you know what? The tone has changed. Our VFX needs some adjustment. There's just all those aspects that we don't see on the VFX side. We might get some temp sound, but we're not doing anything with audio.
And do you find like sometimes that your visual effects will inform the sound in some respects?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yep, that absolutely happens. Like, I work on a lot of shoot 'em ups. There's a lot of gunfights and bullets and muzzle flashes and stuff.
That's my jam.
Yeah. I've done a lot of that. It's fun. So what happens is we end up with a sound deadline. So sound mix is happening on this day. You've got, another month for VFX after that, but we need to have all of the sound elements locked in by then. So earlier than that, we start giving them early drafts so that we can creatively dial it in. But then even on the, client side, they're looking at shots without sound also. And so they see the muzzle flash happening on this frame and this frame. And without sound, they're like, yeah, it looks great. And then they start putting sound and they're like, you know what? It feels like it's a bit late. It's 2 frames late, or, it's in the distance. So it doesn't matter what time it is because you don't see the gun firing. You just need to see the element happen. And it absolutely changes. But we make that earlier in our schedule. So we start locking in the sound things. And it can be really rough. Like those muzzle flashes we're setting them don't look good, but they're placeholders. And so we start, and sometimes they'll do that in the edit also to inform us. They'll give us a first pass of, okay, here's the beats we're looking at. We'll do it. And then it'll change and go back and forth during sound. Absolutely changes things.
Now, lately there's been a rise in films that seem to advertise that they have like no CGI. Or they're doing everything practically. Even when a VFX breakdown comes out and it's like, oh yeah, everything in this shot is CGI.
Yeah.
How does that sort of misinformation hurt the industry?
It's bad. Yeah, it is very bad. I'm working on the Visual Effects Society, the VES Awards, and I'm looking at the breakdowns, and we're voting on what should win the award this year. And these are things that claim to have no CGI. I think they're partially getting confused with the term CGI versus VFX. There's tons of hidden VFX that we do, beauty work, all that stuff. They're not going to consider CGI. I'm guessing that green screens and those kind of comps are not considered CGI to some people. And that's why they say it.
They play the term pretty fast and loose, I think.
Yeah. Hey, we shot you an element. You did all the work to integrate it and composite it. But because we shot the element for you, we didn't use CGI.
It wasn't computer generated.
Right. Yes. But they're thinking of the old school way CGI was a CG creature, a CG car, and that kind of thing. Yeah. And they're using the term, kind of incorrectly. Or yes, the VFX PR needs some work. But I see a lot of really good reporting coming out showing those breakdowns. Like, look how cool this is. So if you have any interest in VFX, a quick search and you find some really great breakdowns, it's just not hitting the big masses. It's very strange that happens. So strange.
And one of the other hot button topics that have, I mean, certainly that were big during the strikes, were like actor likenesses and facial scans.
Yeah.
How afraid should actors be of their likenesses being used and abused, and how can assurances or protections kind of be created for people's likenesses like that?
I think actors are going to be okay if they've got agents, managers, because that's all being written into contracts and stuff. What I have seen personally is extras.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen, hey, we've just scanned 30 extras and now they're going to be turned into hundreds of thousands of people in the crowd. We've now taken their likeness, changed their hair color, their wardrobe, their positioning. We had them doing a couple things, but now they can do anything. So now they're digital doubles. And that's a huge gray area of, it's not really you anymore, but it started with you. And I don't know how you can protect against something like that. And I think that's a little bit scarier because, I have friends who work as extras and that's their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a friend who did that. They got scanned and if the contract says you can use their likeness for this show, is it for that episode? Is it for that season? Is it for all seasons? Mm-hmm. Can the VFX facility then take that asset and put it into other shows? They've changed the skin. You can't really claim it's you anymore because it's changed so much, but it started with you. Super gray area.
That's the whole Ship of Theseus thing.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of sounds like it's more about the people writing the agreements and the negotiations. And I feel like there's probably a responsibility for not just the producers and the production, but also the VFX houses too, right? Like if they're the ones doing the scans, they're the ones that are in possession of the models and everything too. That maybe there should be further like assurances in a written form of like, okay, if we're going to scan these extras, we're going to scan them for this production only. Or
every time we're going to use your likeness on another thing, you're going to be informed and you'll get a paycheck again.
Yeah.
But without enforcement, even accidentally, people are going to do that without fighting the protocols because an artist is working on a new show and says, oh, here's a CG asset of a person. I need to have a digital double falling through screen. I'm just going to grab an asset. There's nothing that ties it to where it ever came from. It's part of a library and you just don't think of it anymore. And also what's to stop somebody from scanning a couple people and putting them online as downloadable digital doubles? Like it started from that person. You can't really tell it's them anymore. So super gray area. And I think that I don't think they're going to necessarily win that. So I don't know how it can be enforced. But the one thing that does kind of help is that technology keeps getting better and better. So a scan that we did for somebody 2 seasons ago isn't necessarily going to hold up for the, season 3. Yeah. And we're going to want to redo it just to get higher quality, better textures, better movement, so there's that.
Yeah. And we also have been taking likenesses of people for these production purposes for since the existence of film. I mean, Logan, we plaster people's faces for prosthetics all the time. Yeah.
Right? If you have a severed head, how often is it, still, you're reusing an old head mold that you have, but you're not paying that guy again to reuse the head.
Oh yeah. I mean, it happens with body parts, any kind of gore and everything. It's like, this was, this was made off of somebody at some point, but they don't get any credit for their likeness.
Also, why are we all scared now? Because it's digital, especially it's like it's probably an asset that can be easier to say lose track of and get spread and dispersed even or something. And
even at a big company that has all the measures in place, but you see an asset and you use it. If it's in your library, you use it. Unless it's explicitly tagged as only for this project, you cannot access it if you're not on that project. It's easy to say, hey, I need an explosion for this. Go to your library, see all your explosions. Some of those were shot for a show specific. And do we have permission to use them from that show? Or did we, as a VFX company, produce that element shoot so that we can use them or cannot? Even if we produce the shoot, if it's paid for by one company, it might not be usable elsewhere. Assets are so hard to track already because there's so much happening every day and you're working on several shows at a time. Just managing your library and finding that explosion is hard enough to try to keep your asset library up to date, let alone where it came from and is it usable? We're good about if, okay, the production company shot this, scanned it, sent it to us, it only will ever be part of that project. But what happens with the other stuff?
I think you just accidentally made an ad for Action VFX.
I know.
I'm super curious. I know you've traveled for VFX quite a bit, right?
Yes.
But you've also traveled the world for scuba diving.
Yes.
And I know that's a passion of yours. Has your knowledge or firsthand experience in sea life ever come in handy in something you've been working on? Say, like,
I wish. Every time I'm like, if only I could use this as reference and use this as a tax write-off for my trips.
Well, you worked on the first Avatar. If you were on the second Avatar,
but I started diving, I think, after that. But yes, I have a friend of mine that's in visual effects that we go diving together. She joins us on some of our trips. She works at Weta and she works on Avatar, and she's just like, I'm getting all this amazing reference. How can we always joke about, like, how can we make this a tax write-off for these amazing, like, we went to the Maldives together. And I have used sea life as references when we're working on, concept design for monsters and stuff, but it's never been like my own photos, because it's always the extra weird stuff in the deep, deep ocean that I don't see. But yes, I do underwater photography. My mom and I go on a big trip every year. We just got back from Indonesia a couple of weeks ago, and that was awesome. And so I travel a lot for that, and I travel a lot for work. Not as much in the last few years, but it's fun. It's fun traveling for a project, but I also don't like being gone for more than 3 months. My most recent travel thing, this is kind of funny, I think. I was in Prague for 3 months for a show. And what's cool about Prague is it's kind of central, and you can hop to different areas pretty quickly. So, like, I had a long weekend and I went to Rome by myself and just wandered around, and that was amazing. And the last weekend of shooting, we were in Austria. They bussed us up to Austria, and it was a big ski chase action scene, bad guys, good guys, guns, skis. And we were location scouting, and it was after principal had finished shooting, and it was just a second unit shoot, stunts, couple people, and we were location scouting. We got this huge tractor, took us up to this mountain. It's a ski resort, but we're not anywhere near the ski lifts. And we're walking through, and I fall through the ice and I break my ankle on the top of the mountain. So I'm on a production. It's a work thing.
It's already a hilarious story.
Yes, hilarious. But in hindsight, it was not funny at the time, but I was already, we were already going through this deep snow, and we kept getting stuck. And there were 2 stunt people that were there that had to keep taking several of us and pulling us out of the snow. And I fell through one time, and I knew it was broken instantly, and I screamed. And I had to get rescued off the mountain. They had to come get me and put me in a toboggan and ski me down. And then I had to have surgery and in the hospital for 4 days. And all while I'm in a different country where no one speaks English. And actually, in the hospital, the doctors spoke English, which was really, really nice. The nurses, not so much, but it was amazing. They treated me really well. But in hindsight, it's kind of funny. But okay, maybe it's not so funny. But
well, you know what production's saying now, though, is there goes that VFX supervisor taking up more of our time again. That's what's
yeah. If it weren't a location scout, you're probably right. But yeah. But there's another interesting thing is that even though I was there for the production, I'm a loan out. I don't have a union. I am not being paid by the production. I'm a loan out. I'm being paid by the studio I work for. So every cost doesn't come out of the production. So me getting hurt didn't cost them anything, but also couldn't get anything covered at the same time. But my workers' comp took care of it. My company took really good care of me. Also interesting part is that when I got home, I had to have a second surgery because I had some stabilizing screw, a lot of hardware in my leg now. I had some stabilizing screws that had to get taken back out. And no one out here wanted to touch me because it was an international surgery for the first one. And they didn't want anything bad to happen and then get blamed. Yeah. So it was quite a challenge to find a doctor to take me. They were very close to sending me back to Austria for the second surgery.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you were on a panel where you were watching some of the bigger movies, trying to help with awards for VFX. I know that they just announced the Oscar nominations within the last week. Were there any surprising nominations or lack of nominations that as someone who works, that's your particular field, were there any, of those that kind of surprised you?
No, not for VFX. I felt like it was okay, this is what I'm expecting. And what I love is for the Visual Effects Society, They have their own awards. And as a member, you vote. I love seeing the breakdowns, the before and afters. And some of these might not get released to the public because a lot of the productions don't want you to see that. Not because they're claiming it's no CGI. They don't always want to reveal the magic. And sometimes if they do, they want to control how it's fed to audiences. So I get to see a little bit more of the raw before and afters from the artist's perspective. And I love seeing how things are done. And I love when I can still be amazed, having been in this industry for more than 20 years, still looking at something and going, okay, I get how they did it, but just the amount of planning that went into that and the execution and pulling it off, it's like, super impressive. And that's really fun for me. I love being able to vote on these events and see what other people are doing.
It's like, I get the how they did it, but how did you do it?
Like they showed me how they did it, but still, like the old school stuff that they pulled off. It's just like, okay, I've seen how it's done, but my brain still is like, how did they even think of that and then execute it? And
well, or like with something as wild as like, I know another movie you mentioned that you're like Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
Is one of those where it's like, where they're pulling a lot of really cool effects, but they're being done in camera. Yeah. Like they're finding really cool ways for it.
From what I've read, they were going to go more VFX, which was, rougher at the time. They were going to go that way. And then they pivoted at the last minute and went all practical. And it's so cool. And I watched the scenes and things they pulled off. And I'm like, okay, how would we do this nowadays? Because we would probably try to do it digital.
Yeah.
What is in the future for VFX that gets you really excited? What's either coming around the corner or something that you're looking forward to doing or something that you really would love to do?
That's interesting. I want to work more with the volume. I think that's cool. Super cool. I've gotten a taste of it. And I love the planning and the coming up with ideas. And that all kind of ties in of like, let's figure it all out ahead of time. Other than that, I really want to work studio side personally. I think that would be cool to have more of a deciding factor early on so that I can collaborate and come up with some fun things to do before before the ideas are so narrow. I just think that would be really fun.
And what do you think of like the expansion of tools for VFX that are much more accessible than they used to be? Like Blender has become a software that has been used at a lot of studios. The studio worked at Barnstorm, they adopted it early on, I think, right? And
exclusively. I mean, that's almost everything was Silicon Valley, everything, all of that.
And it's, one of my tools too. And it's very accessible.
Anybody can use it, but you can also work with the developers and build upon it, make your own tools. So you're not, it's great because anybody can learn it before they're using it in production. Facilities can build the tools and expand on it and make custom uses for it. I know AI is going to bring us a lot of new tools. I think there's going to be some, just seeing what paintouts it can do. Hey, I need to create a whole matte painting, but I have to paint out this foreground building first. AI can almost already do that. And then you can expand, with artists beyond that. I know there's a lot of touchiness of how far AI will go versus an artist, but I think we're going to get some really great tools out of the AI explosion.
And I'm super interested in the AI tools for, say, rotoscoping, not to put our roto artists out of work because they're doing amazing work, but just saves a lot of time on a lot of things too. And I think there's always still going to be space for the roto artists because, again, like I said, they do magic. They paint out hair. I don't see AI doing that yet. But that was something that I think Logan and I had talked about before, is anytime we talk about these technologies and say they can't do this, always got to follow with yet. Because I remember when people used to say, you can't make a CGI explosion look good.
Right.
Well, no, you can.
It's still hard. Fire
it's hard,
and water,
yes.
It's still really hard. But there are some that I could be like, I was convinced. I've absolutely been convinced by both. But it is not a fast thing to do. And
no. But it can, though. That's the thing. Is everybody say it can't do this? It can. Well,
yes. But it also still comes down to what you shot on camera. Looking good too. Mm-hmm. You can have the best explosion in the world, but if you didn't shoot something nice to put it into, it's not going to look as good. Even if the explosion's as realistic as it can be, if it's not tied into good photography, it all goes hand in hand. At least we hope it does. Because when they bring us in at the end, it makes it a lot harder for us to make things look good. And I think that can give VFX a bad rap as well, because you'll notice something not quite looking right. And it's not necessarily the fault of the VFX. there's so many other factors. There's time. How much time are you given? There's budget. There's what did you start with? If you started with something not so great, you can only do so much.
Now, on that note, I think I have my own answer for this one, and I'm sure I know you do. And I think this is more of a message to any, say, producers or production filmmakers listening to this. When is the best time to bring in a VFX professional into your production? Let's say you're not necessarily Marvel, you're not necessarily Universal Studios, and you've got the teams already in place for all this. If you're on the independent end, when is a good time to bring in a VFX professional in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for more indie movies, and I'm not talking like the super lowest budget, but just indie movies in general, I think it's great to have a consultation at script stage when that script is going to start going out. Not necessarily actors, but when you're going to start. What's that?
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm not saying you need to bring on a VFX person full time, but do a consult. And I've done that for some friends. And there are things that a VFX perspective is going to call out that you wouldn't have thought of. And there's going to be location-based things like, hey, what are you thinking? It's going to ask questions that you may not have thought of as a producer. And, from location, from VFX, from, hey, this thing sounds really simple, but in reality, this is tricky to shoot. And then when you're talking about bringing somebody on a more full-time or more regular basis, it really should be when you start putting your team together. Once you know who your DP is going to be, and ideally your director, you start having the conversations, because that's when changes are going to be made. And you don't want those changes made and set in stone before a VFX voice has chimed in, because we can give insight that you wouldn't think of, both positive and negative. We can be like, oh no, that's going to be really hard to achieve, or hey, that's really close, but if you just think about it like this, we can make it even cooler. And I think, having those conversations early, even if it's not on a full-time basis yet, is really valuable. But then once you're in pre-production, depending on how heavy, you should have somebody attending. Like, I generally am in all the production meetings, even if I'm just on the phone listening. And even though that deals with a lot of other departments, it lets me know what else is going on that I wouldn't have known about. Sometimes I have to chime in for wardrobe or for makeup. They'll suggest like, oh, hey, we're planning to do this. And I'm like, okay, but you just decided to make an entire blue screen, and now your wardrobe is going to be more cools and blues. Let's talk about this in a different way. Let's make some changes. And not to change the wardrobe, but let's change my plan then. I'm not telling anybody to change, but it is a factor. Or, hey, you've got somebody in a very constricting outfit, but what you want them to do later and be all wired up, that could be, a tricky thing. Or it's actually, I've had it the opposite, where someone's wearing a big skirt and dress, but you have them falling out of something on wire work. It's just something to think about. I like to overplan so that when something comes up on set at the last minute and changes, I've already hopefully thought of a backup plan. Sometimes I'll get stumped, no question. They'll be like, how about this? And I'll be like, great, let's do it. And then in the background, I'm like, all right, how am I pulling this off? I got 10 minutes to decide what I need to set up, and we're going to go.
And do you ever find yourself saying, we'll fix it in post?
Oh, all the time. I won't phrase it that way. I refuse, but yes.
It hurts a little in the soul each time,
I
right?
just can't bring myself to say those words, but yes, absolutely. It's back to that sandbag thing I talked about. There are times where I see things happening and it's really not a big deal. And the budget for us to paint something out later can be pretty nominal. And so there are times I'm like, and I won't go to the director or interrupt anybody, but I may go to a producer and say, hey, if it helps, this is not a hard thing for us to do later, if it saves you any grief right now, and then let them decide what they want to do. It also depends. Some productions have me way more involved, and some I'm just quietly sitting there and chiming in the least amount, It all
I can relate.
And just a side note, as I'm looking at Logan's background, your wiggling green screen has been driving me nuts.
Yeah. It's not quite big enough for my chair. It's not big enough for my chair. I don't know what to say.
My VFX supervisor brain is like,
oh yeah,
you're doing this to me. You're just taunting me.
I don't have a nice enough location to not use the green screen. Okay.
That's okay.
The dropout from your glasses is already making me cringe, because that's we fight all the time on green screens.
Yeah.
I've been surprised at a lot of the capabilities with things like Zoom.
Yeah. When I moved a couple of years ago, And I had my nice background set up. But while I was moving, my background was a mess because I hadn't settled in yet. And I so regret not taking a picture of my old setup just to be able to comp it in for meetings until I got situated in the new house. Like I had months before I fully unpacked this office and got set up. And so instead of just the plain white walls, I wish I had just taken a picture of my old room to have behind me.
That would be a nice background plate.
So on that note, I saw this TikTok or some social media post of a guy that would have meetings and it's just in his room, right?
Yeah.
And he had a secret green screen up, but it was just of the perspective of his camera and his room. Mm-hmm. And so in the middle of his meetings or whatever, he would walk in behind himself with a cup of coffee and then put it down just out of frame. And then he'd go, thanks. And then drink it and just move on with the meeting. And people.
Yeah. When we first started going to Zooms during COVID and we had big group team meetings, some of the artists on our team got real creative with that stuff.
Oh, I hope so.
It would start being infinite loops of them crossing themselves and doing things. And people were trying to outdo each other. And they're like, what kind of tech can we bring in to make the Snapchat filters would have like, there's a hat floating on you. People were trying to like hack in to be able to do funnier things like that. It got a little crazy, but then the charm wore off and it died down a little bit. But people were getting really crazy. Or there'd be two people and their backgrounds and they would swap backgrounds and we'll be like, wait a minute, we know that's not your office, that's someone else's. And they just started getting, trying to outdo each other. It was really fun for a while.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tammy. We really appreciate you being here. And this is an absolute treat getting to hear from you and all this. Yeah. If someone's looking for a VFX consult and, doesn't come to me first, obviously, but, looking for a VFX consult, how can people get a hold of you or see what you're up to?
I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. Instagram has more of my scuba pictures and things. And LinkedIn's all work. So yeah. What is my Instagram is Tammy_Sutton, and then LinkedIn just under Tammy Sutton.
Well, thank you so much, Tammy. It's been a blast.
We might not have been able to compete with the loops of themselves, but I think we're doing pretty good right now.
Yeah, I think this is not a bad look for us, maybe, for what we got going on here.
Yeah, it certainly gives off food fight vibes, at least for me. But I'm good.
Well, that was an awesome interview, Logan. I had a great time. It was great catching up with her, hearing her perspective on visual effects and how I'm already distracted by my own face right now. All right, that's a little better now. I can think now. You can stay there if you want.
I did find it very interesting hearing the similarities between kind of what we've talked about before with other, like, hey, include me. Like, I want to help you make the best product you can. So in her case, the sooner you can get me on set and I can see how you're shooting or what you're going to put together, great. I can make sure that you're getting the pieces you need so that your final digital components look better than they would if you're just handing me random stuff.
Exactly. And that's something that I'm constantly emphasizing to my clients and the productions I'm on is just let's talk early as possible. When you bring us in a little late to just say, fix something in post, your options are a little more limited than they would be if you had somebody consulting from the very beginning, being a part of the process and helping you develop your looks even too.
Yeah, you don't want to have the budget go weird and then just kind of run out of your effects halfway through.
And Tammy, don't worry, we're going to work on our green screen backgrounds. We're going to be, I'm
going to leave that corner messed up just to mess with you, Tammy, from here on out forever. Even if I fix it, you come back on the show and we'll have that corner. It's looking a little weird.
All right. Well, Logan, let's let the people know where they can find you.
I'm findable. I'm on Twitter at FilmGuy89, Instagram at FilmGuy1989. And you can find me on YouTube with my various at-home table reads with the Quarantine Theater Company.
Great shows you guys keep putting on there. It's weekly, right? Basically
weekly. Yeah. We try to have a video up a week. We have a few abridged ones coming up, and when we hit March, we're trying to tackle Barbie. So that'll be an interesting one to get to see. That's
great. And some of them are just wonderfully bizarre, and I love them.
Oh, yes.
I love them.
Like the one where Willy Wonka has a body count.
Tonight we're tackling an odd one, to say the very least. This is the untold origin story of Willy Wonka. I'm not going to go into too much more detail other than that. We're just going to see where this thing goes.
It's wild.
There you go. There you go. And you can find me at VFX2Go on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. One of these days I'll actually post the Threads, and I'm working on that.
Yeah,
part,
I haven't even opened the thing. I don't even know Threads, really. I know it's the better option, I think.
And our website, vfx2go.com. And everybody, if you're interested in catching up more on Hollywood Unveiled and seeing some past episodes, clips, that sort of thing, you can check us out at hollywoodunveiled.com, or just click one of the links below and, you'll see some more. But
will be links.
Until next time, I've been Jake.
And I'm Logan.
And I think that was a pretty good ending.
But the lack of ending is not really an ending. It's kind of just an ending.
Yeah, but you see...